Now we'll be moving on to the interdisciplinary dialogue. We've set aside um, until 3:15 to have this dialogue, as long as people are willing to stay. We have two questions that we have, um, we want to ask before the free talk, and then anything that comes up in due course of this discussion, please feel free to go any direction you need to or you feel appropriate. The first question was, what experiments can distinguish between A, the organismic level of organization exerting top-down agency on the cellular level, and B, the cellular level exerting bottom-up agency on the organismic level? If anyone has, I know Dr. Levin is doing incredible experiments at his lab. Perhaps he has some input about this question.
Well, the way that we do those experiments is to, first of all, make hypotheses about what the higher level is doing. Then we embody those hypotheses in some sort of a computational framework that helps us derive implications of those hypotheses, and then we test them. So specifically, for example, you can hypothesize that during specific morphogenetic events that there's a global entity that's trying to navigate anatomical space to reach specific outcomes. So what you might do then, which is what we have done, is to make specific biophysical models of cellular networks that store large-scale patterns that regulate where in the anatomical space they go, and they might be making an eye or a limb or something else. And then you can make hypotheses about what level of intelligence they have to do so, which means you have to perturb it and see what happens. So you put barriers in its place, you change internal circumstances, meaning their own parts, you change external circumstances. And what you may or may not find then, as a matter of empirical discovery, is that the collective has specific capabilities that the individual parts don't have. So for example, no individual cell stores the large scale parameters of what it's building, but the collective certainly does, and we can read it out. We can physically see it now using for example, these bioelectric visualization techniques. We can actually see what the thing's trying to build. And so when you can see the represented information, which is spread over the collective, it doesn't exist in individuals. Changing what individual cells doesn't do anything. You have to talk to the collective, not to the individual cells. When you can see it, you can decode it, and you can rewrite it to make them do something else. Then you know that you've in some way communicated with the collective and not the individual cells. There's other ways of doing it. I'll describe a very simple thing. At one point, and we didn't get to finish this, unfortunately, because the pandemic intervened, but just as an example of the kind of thing you can do. At one point, we wanted to communicate with an ant colony, not the individual ants, but the colony. Okay, so how might you communicate with a colony? We wanted to train the colony to do something. So what we created was a device where there are two platforms. And platform A has a camera looking over it, and simply there's a computer that counts the number of ants. And then platform B has a little dropper on it that drops sugar water for the ants. And so the deal is, the more ants are standing on platform A, the more reward happens on platform B. Now that would be the kind of thing you would want to do, because then no individual ant would ever have the experience of doing something and getting rewarded, right? So the individual ants don't see this at all, but the collective, much like that rat pressing the lever that I showed in my talk, the ant colony might actually learn that if I send a bunch of ants over here, then I can collect food over there, and then they can all share together later or whatever. So that's the sort of thing you want. You want scientific paradigms where you communicate and exchange information with a collective that the individual parts don't have, and then you test it to make sure that it's giving you some kind of extra capability that you didn't have before, and that's the evidence that you found it.
So what happens, and now I can only ask this question from my empirically verified first-person experience, as an organism who is composed of cells and different kinds of communities of cells that have regional functions, and I accept that, but here I am with a unified sense of self with unified objectives. So at what point does my unity of myself that I'm not speculating because this is my experience, right? My experience is, here I am as an individual, but I'm composed of communities of cells. So how do we talk about at what point that transition occurs back to an individual self?
I mean, it's, so right now your left hemisphere has just communicated with mine, and it speaks very well, and it uses language, and it has made a claim about being a unified self. What we've not heard from is your right hemisphere, which we would if we did a sodium pentothal experiment and put the left hemisphere to sleep. We would, and we give you a pen, your right hemisphere would reply and say some things that your left hemisphere actually doesn't even agree with. Okay, so those experiments have been done in both split brain patients and temporary experiments like with sodium pentothal. So this idea that we are some kind of a unified mind that is truly unified, I think is not supportable, because we're very used to hearing from the linguistically capable organs, such as your left hemisphere. We've not yet heard from your liver and your kidneys and various other components, which are also navigating various problem spaces and quite cleverly keeping you alive. They just don't speak. And so, I'm not arguing that you're not a unified self, but you're not the only unified self, not even in your body, never mind, in general. You're not even the only unity in the body. So and in fact, we're developing now tools using AI techniques and some other tools to actually talk to and do much better at communicating with these other organs, mostly for medicine, but it of course raises interesting philosophical implications. So, basically all of the mechanisms that are operating in your brain to give you this feeling of unity, at least those of us who aren't having a dissociative identity disorder, to give you a feeling of unity, those exact mechanisms are present all over your body. And I think we need to be very careful not to confuse the ability to talk about it with the actual inner experience, which of course we never experience each other's inner world anyway. So yeah, that's what I think we should keep in mind.
If I may intervene, I think there's a little bit of tension in what you just said, because on one side you're referring to like the kidneys and parts of the body that you say they are not speaking, they are not doing the thing, but they are still part of the experience, you might say, right?
They're part of whose experience? My point
the
is
experience that the experience that he has of being a first person, like having this outlook on the world, where he says like he experiences himself as a unitary being. You would say that it's included in the experience, right?
Well, I'm not arguing that he doesn't have a first-person experience. Of course he does.
No, but those processes, those bodily processes, they constrain how the brain works, right?
In the sense that it's keeping you alive, and that's great. My point is,
no, but there's very strong, like you see the connection between the brainstem and all the other organs is very strong. Like cognition is enabled by all these processes. Furthermore, I would say that if you try to localize then and say that the mind is reducible to the brain, then you forget about the history of how the mind is constituted. And it's not constituted because the brain is in a body that's in a world that's interacting with this world. And all the gadgets, all the things that you use shape the brain, shape the mind, and therefore you could say that they are part of the mind. This is like, at least within philosophy of mind, this is the current trend that goes against the view that the mind is reducible to the brain. And I feel like you are saying on one hand, like the body is relevant for it, but on the other hand, we want to say that the mind is in the brain. And I think there's ample research that. Okay,
I did not say. I did not say that the mind is in the brain. I did not say that.
Okay.
And
it's just that you say that the right hemisphere is doing something.
No, I'm saying that the left hemisphere, which is the one that can speak, okay, does a really good job of convincing each other, and that's what it's there for, is to lubricate social interaction among us animals. It does a great job in making us think that we are now talking to the only mind in the body, because it's so dominant. My point is there is no the mind, there are many minds. Within your body, there are multiple minds, And we are hyper-focused as a linguistic species. We're hyper-focused on the one that can speak and the one that operates in this three-dimensional world. We do not generally see the ones that operate in these other spaces. And I don't see any reason to think that they do not have their own first-person experience. They just can't talk about it. And I don't think you have access to that first-person experience. At least I don't have access to my kidney's first-person experience. I don't know if you do, but in the same way that I don't have access to your first-person experience. So I just don't think we should fall in love with the speech aspect of it, because it's not the only mind that we're dealing with.
Okay, no, I think we agree, but I think I'm just coming at it from a little bit different perspective, where I think, yeah, I agree with, of course, what you're saying, that it is and this is also a problem has been within consciousness research, that it has been very fixated, for instance, on the fact that we can see, you know. And this is like that we reduce consciousness to this one, you know, like, so there are, of course, some biases in this kind of, and like linguistics, of course, the same problem. And maybe you can say different minds, but at the same time, different minds, but they are still integrated. So there is some kind of cognitive integration, you might say, into the.
Well, this is true. We all exist simultaneously. So the ants have minds, and the ant colony has its own mind, and they are all present simultaneously. I think we are a patchwork of multiple different minds, and of course they integrate. But that's okay. They are all still present.
So wouldn't there be a priority, though? No doubt what you're saying is true. If a single cell is cognitive, then a colony of cells making an organ must also be cognitive and must have its own.
I mean, maybe, right? Because putting things together in a way that makes for a higher order entity is not trivial. You can't just sort of pile them together and hope it happens. I mean, in cells, it does happen. I agree with you. But I'm just saying it's not guaranteed. Just putting things together into a group doesn't guarantee the emergent mind at all.
But my point is that accepting what you're saying, that there is more than a single, I'm not the only single intelligence in my organism self. Nonetheless, there's a priority, because if the intelligence of my kidney or any other organ isn't harmonized with what I think is myself, which is more important than the individual intelligences of any of my organs, you know, if my organ starts acting in a way that's not harmonized with the rest of the body, then that's a disease, right? And I have to get it removed, or have to get medicine. So if that intelligence isn't cohesively integrated with my experience, such that now I have kidney pain, my kidney is intelligent, no problem, but now I have pain, I can't, you know, eat or go to the car, it's not harmonized with my totality of experience. So this seems to be saying that there's a priority of what I think is myself over the selves of the organs, such that they need to be either harmonized with my well-being, and if they're not harmonized with my well-being, then I seek medical attention to get them to be harmonized with my well-being.
Well, what you just said about a priority order and the fact that your experience has priority is precisely what I would expect the left hemisphere to say. Of course, it thinks that's the priority. I would say that if the liver could talk, it would say to you, you know, this brain is terribly unharmonized. It drinks a beer every night, and I hate it. And I can't make it stop, and we really need to have this brain treated to have better nutrition and whatever, right? Like you took the perspective of the human personality. That's not surprising, of course you did, but I think we need to be clear that this priority order is only from the perspective of you. Now, if you want to argue that you have a higher degree of intelligence than the other subsystems, yeah, I think probably that's true, although even that's not super obvious, because some of these other spaces that the components of your body navigate are very difficult high dimensional spaces, and it is not trivial to compare intelligence across these domains. But you know, okay, I can sort of I can sort of provisionally accept that maybe there is an order in terms of the size of the cognitive light cone. So the integrated human personality has a larger cognitive light cone than any of its organs. So I'll give you that. But the priority, I wouldn't buy that at all, because you're just taking one perspective, and then from that perspective, of course, it's the most important one.
Well, wouldn't then the need for reproduction to get another kidney or another liver reinforce the priority that I'm trying to emphasize, such that kidneys can't reproduce with other kidneys to make a kidney, right? You have
That's a very contingent fact of our evolution. In planaria, they can, and yes, humans have developed in a certain way that the reproduction is done only in one particular way. Although anthrobots and xenobots in particular can reproduce in a completely different way. So I wouldn't, the fact that our evolution happens to have chosen a track where you need the entire organism instead of budding off the way that plants do and some other creatures do. I mean, that's a pretty, I think that's just a contingent outcome of the way that the vagaries of evolution work. I don't think it's a fundamental fact about biology at all. And I think you could easily imagine on other planets that, for example, there would be an intelligent species that was much more like planaria, the thing with tear themselves. What planaria do? They tear themselves in half and each half regenerates, and now you got two, and there you go. So the fact that humans don't do this is a contingent fact of our evolutionary of the random evolutionary path that we have followed. Didn't have to be that way.
And I'm interested in what perhaps Dr. Rosslenbroich would say. His research is working on that evolution kind of leads to a independence from nature, such that when you get the high-level mammals, they are more independent, which, and again, in the human form of life, it's such a sophistication that we can, have thought about the self, which can inspire art, science, philosophy, government, religion. So how that evolutionary trajectory that increases freedom up to the point, as far as we know, human life, what does that say about the role or priority of the organism as a whole versus what also exists, like planaria, where it doesn't seem like the organism as a whole is so important?
Yeah, I think that evolution is not just a random event, that there somehow came out such complex organisms like mammals and birds and humans, but that there is some trajectory within this. But I can't describe the factors that are really governing this process. What I tried to do is just to describe the quality that is running through evolution with these possibilities organisms gain. And there might many factors be involved, but on different levels, the possibilities changed, the opportunities organisms had changed. And this is something that seems to be important in evolution. And I think this also concerns this principle of integration, that basically I agree with Dr. Levin that intelligence is possible on very different levels and within different cells and systems and things like this. But then there is something in evolution that makes this integration, this coordination within a single organism such as a mammal or a bird. And this integrating principle somehow has a relevance in evolution. So I think it's not just a random thing, but we have to learn about the quality that changed through these, for example, the evolution of vertebrates. And that was what I'm trying to describe. It's especially this integration into a coherent and very and an organism that gains degrees of freedom in the environment. There is something in evolution that is important in this regard. That doesn't exclude the wonderful picture you made, that intelligence is on different levels, but there is some integration that is important. That is my point, and this is what I call autonomy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually agree with all of that. I think absolutely. I have this. I've got some other slides that I didn't show where you can see that actually what's happening from the very beginning of life as we know it is it begins to project this integrated autonomy into different problem spaces. So from metabolic space through physiological space, transcriptional, anatomical, behavioral, linguistic, and whatever, you can actually see evolution projecting higher, and as the cognitive light cones grow, they project into these other spaces. So I'm completely on board with that. And we can even so let me try this out on you and see what you think about this one particular way in which the intelligence of the material shapes evolution. Okay, so imagine a scenario where the material itself has the ability to adapt to certain unforeseen changes. For example, like in the example that I showed you, if you have a tadpole and you move the mouth off to the side, it'll come back to where it needs to be. Now that kind of competency, the ability to get the job done even when things change, has a very particular implication for evolution. Imagine you're that tadpole and you've got a mutation, and like most mutations, it does multiple things. So let's say this mutation moves the mouth off to the side, and it also does something else in the embryo that might actually be a good idea. Under the standard view, where the genetics determines the phenotype, that animal is dead because the mouth is off to the side and you don't eat, and that's it. And evolution never sees the benefits of the other benefits of that mutation. So you would have to wait then to get a mutation that does the good thing without the side effect on the mouth. So that makes it very, very slow. What actually happens is that you get the mutation, most of what it causes gets repaired, and the other effects become either things that were very negative become either neutral or in some cases positive, and evolution gets to see all of those things. Now, here's the implications. Aside from being faster, here's the implications. When that animal comes up for selection cannot tell whether it has a proper face because the genetics were amazing or because actually there were some issues, but it fixed it along the way. Selection doesn't know. So what happens is, if the material has this competency, selection has a really hard time selecting for the best genomes. You can select for the best organisms, but those are not necessarily who had the best genomes. So now you have a problem. You can't do what selection is supposed to do, which is pick out the best genomes. It turns out, and we've done a lot of simulations on this, so we've actually simulated how this kind of dynamic goes. It turns out that what happens is, when evolution, when you're hiding information about the genome from selection, all of the work that evolution is doing starts being applied to not the structural genome, because you can't see it. All the work is done on the competency mechanisms themselves. In other words, they get better at repairing these things because the genome is not reliable. As soon as you improve that competency, that makes it even harder for selection to see the genome, which then makes more efforts to improve the competency, which then makes it harder, and so on. You end up with a positive feedback loop, where what happens is that all of the effort starts to go towards being able to repair for all kinds of problems that might be in the genetics. And different organisms actually land on different places along that spectrum. For example, there are species like C. elegans, the nematode, which are where the genetics basically determines everything that happens. They are extremely all the cells are numbered. There's the same number of cells in every organism. It's like very cookie cutter. On the other side of the spectrum, you've got planaria, which I'll tell you a couple of things about momentarily. And then in between, you have things like salamanders and mammals. They're sort of in between. Interesting thing about planaria, because planaria reproduce by tearing themselves in half and regenerating, unlike us, if we get a mutation in our body, our children don't inherit it. Yeah, we segregate our germline, we clean it every time. Planaria don't do that. Every mutation that doesn't kill the stem cell is then expanded into the next generation. So for 400 million years, these guys have been accumulating these crazy mutations. Their genome is an extreme mess. The cells are mixoploid. They look like a tumor because every cell has a different number of chromosomes. Okay, because they've been accumulating. Now that material is so unreliable that this positive feedback ratchet has gone all the way to the right, and they basically, as much as possible, ignore the structural genome. Well, for example, what that means is, in planaria, it's the only model system where you cannot get mutant strains. Every other creature, let's say Drosophila mice, you can call the stock center and you can get a mutant, with weird looking tail or curly hair or something. You can get these mutants. In planaria, the only known abnormal strain of planaria is our two-headed form, and it's not genetic. Nothing wrong with the genetics, because no one in the last 40 years that they've been trying to do this has produced a transgenic planarian, because what in that species, everything has gone, because the hardware is so unreliable, everything has gone into being able to get the job done, even if the material is pretty junky. So this positive feedback loop, and so now the big picture here, this positive feedback loop between competency and the ability to solve problems that you didn't anticipate is, I think, the basis of what we see as intelligence. It's there not just in humans, it goes all the way back, and it starts at the very beginning of life with the fact that you cannot rely on your material. Unlike our computational tools, the biological material is fundamentally unreliable, which triggers this positive feedback loop of problem solving and creativity, first in building the body and then in behavior and everything else. So that's my story for how intelligence and evolution make this positive feedback loop, and it just amplifies from the word go in terms of the creative problem solving.
That's very interesting, and I can really follow this. What do you think about the term phenotypic plasticity? I think we are thinking along different forms of phenotypic plasticity. It can be narrow and it can be broad, and this depends on the genetic system, for example, maybe even in humans, and it can be very different between different animals. That's what you said. So I always have the impression that we have a much better guidance if we think along narrow or broader types of phenotypic plasticity to talk about these different systems than just making the case of one gene, one trait, and things like this. And I'm always trying to use this term with the students to get them a little bit into the new genetic thinking and say, look at the system you have under view. Is there a narrow or is there a broad phenotypic plasticity with everything between it? What do you think about this term?
I think it's very important, and it's a great step in the right direction. But I sort of put it on steroids in the sense that it's not just phenotypic plasticity. It's the fact that I think that what evolution actually makes is problem-solving agents. And when you have a problem-solving agent, it's not, I mean, sometimes like in plants, okay, here are 3 types of things this plant can do depending on the water content of the soil or something like that. I think more generally, this phenotypic plasticity is the same as we would say that a human or an intelligent animal has behavioral plasticity. It's a huge, it's an enormous space of possible solutions. So yes, phenotypic plasticity, but you also get part of what I'm interested in is, and I sort of rushed it at the end of my talk, is that there are specific phenotypes that you can get in a standard way from certain animals and plants, right? And we recognize this is this isotype, that's that, and you can, but it also seems to be the case that by doing various kinds of very simple bioengineering, like in our case with the xenobots and the anthrobots, we don't add anything. We don't change the genome. We don't put them in a new environment. We don't give them new circuits. We don't use drugs. There's almost nothing. But with enabling a different lifestyle, they will spontaneously acquire forms and behaviors that no one would have guessed is part of the phenotypic plasticity of what that cell could do. It just is so far from what they normally do. So I love phenotypic plasticity. I just think it's so incredibly wide that we really should be talking about a very broad range of intelligent problem-solving behaviors as opposed to canalized, because the standard biology paradigm, when they give you phenotypic plasticity, they sort of couch it as, well, yes, evolution gave you 3 different roads you can go down, and that's the plasticity. I think we should go way beyond that.
So the more important property is agency of the organism itself, isn't it?
I think so. Yeah. I think so. But to be, 100% I agree. But I want to be clear. There's the agency of the organism, which is what we were, you know, what you can talk about. What does the actual organism do? But there's also the agency of the organs, the tissues, the groups of cells, the molecular networks within.
Yeah.
It is there's lots going on here that is absolutely agency, that is not just the conventional organism.
Yeah.
If I may just ask a question for Professor Levin. So I agree with all the things you're saying, of course, but I'm a philosopher, of course, so I don't understand all the empirical stuff perfectly, but I think it's very interesting. And there was just one thing that I think maybe I misunderstood during your presentation, and it was when you said the thing about you don't see a clear distinction between living and dead systems, or maybe because maybe I misunderstood, because I was thinking like living and inert systems, or like biological and physical systems. And I was just thinking what you said just now about how maybe plasticity is understood in a bit like it could be radicalized the way we understand it, because the possibilities that we speak about we might not be able to specify them in advance, you know, because they emerge historically and unpredictably for living systems. And I mean, this was something that I emphasized in my talk, was that at least this is like kind of Stuart Kaufman kind of thinking, where he would say that what characterizes living systems and sets them apart from inert systems is that you cannot really predefine the space of possibilities. So like he likes to use the example of the screwdriver, you know, like how many uses is there of the screwdriver? And he says like, you can open a can, you can peel paint, you can blah, blah, blah. But can you list all the possible uses in advance? And he says no. And it's not because it's not because there are infinite uses, but it's because it's indefinite how many ways you can use it. And I don't know, maybe I misunderstood your point. So I wanted to see if I could understand better.
Yeah, my point is this. I think that there are many steps along the way from inert to what people currently recognize as living. I don't think these are two binary sharp categories. Many people have tried to make good definitions. There is no good definition. People don't agree on a good definition. And I think what's most important is that I have never seen any benefit in terms of new discoveries, new capabilities, new research programs from somebody that starts out with a binary distinction and then gains some sort of benefit from it. What I have seen is people who try to develop, as I have and other people have, a framework of scaling, to say that, okay, these are the properties of completely inert matter, so the lowest point on our continuum, and here are the things that can happen to that matter to progressively scale it up so that it does some of the things and then more of the things and then all of the things that we associate with fully autonomous organisms. That's actually empirically useful, because if you have a story of scaling, that enables experiments to test for new capabilities of things that you didn't think had them, which we have looked for and found. And it also helps you make new things that we didn't have before. And it helps you to understand the origin. I mean, in the end, the fact remains that whatever capabilities we sitting here have, we all started life as a little blob of chemistry. That's it. And so unless you are committed to some kind of a sharp transition, and I've never heard a good story of where and how that transition happens, then what we need are not sharp categories. We need stories of transformation and scaling. And that's my only point. Of course, there's inanimate matter, which doesn't do as many interesting things as quote unquote living things. But I think that what life is doing is scaling up in ways that we can now study properties that smoothly merge into the non-living world. Otherwise, you're looking for some sort of a discrete miracle, and I've never seen one, and I've never seen a story that's useful about it.
I mean, maybe, but I mean, as soon as you start talking about emergence, then I think emergence and scaling is not exactly the same, at least if you speak about like ontological emergence. So I think, at least in my understanding, and I think it also has some effect on how you view, for instance, possibility of artificial intelligence. Because like you said something about how you think it might like emerge, and I think that would be the way that it happened. It would be some emergent thing that we couldn't predict in a way. But what I would say is the problem with most of the research on artificial intelligence is that it takes for granted a deductive approach where it thinks that the space of the state space is they predefine the state space, and they don't understand that organisms are characterized by creativity and by being able to respond to novelty and new affordances, and to also mold their environment and have this active engagement with the environment. And I think at least from my view, as long as you have this deductive approach to intelligence, then you will never achieve general artificial intelligence. And I think this is also, at least some people argue within the kind of artificial intelligence community, say that if you want artificial intelligence, you need some kind of artificial living system as well, because intelligence emerges precisely through this living engagement with the environment.
So we could talk about the whole artificial intelligence thing. I don't disagree with you that the creativity is a key aspect of this. I actually think that's true, but I don't see any reason why the random vagaries of evolution is the only way you can make systems that do this. I mean, I think we can make either hybrid or fully synthetic systems that do the kind of thing that living things do. Our current machines don't do this, of course. Our current architectures are not doing this. But once we understand how that is actually working in the living world, which after all is a bunch of biochemical components, you can do some of that. But I want to go back to something that really is more about the thing we were talking about, emergence. So the thing I don't love about talk of emergence is that it really hides a lot. When you say something, let's say somebody will say, okay, during embryogenesis, you start out as a blob of chemistry, but eventually there's an emergent mind. So it sounds like you've said something, but if you sort of dig into it, what does that actually mean? You say, well, when did it happen? And you say, well, somewhere when you have a brain, but that takes 4 months to grow that. And they say, well, at some point and so when you really push on it, what you find is you never find a sharp moment of emergence when something clicks into being. You actually find a very smooth and stretched out, slow. And then we're back to what I said, which is it's a story of scaling and transformation. You can call it emergence, but in the end, if you want to do science and say where and when did this emergence take place, I've tracked down a million of these stories that people say are emergent, and you never end up with anything that's actually sharp. You end up with some kind of thing that takes a really long time, and lots of stuff is changing. And you can, once you look carefully at it, you see, I see. So first it got better at this, then it got better at that, and then it scaled up on this. That's what you always see. There's never a sharp story to be found for any.
But there are critical transitions.
Like what?
Like you would have from liquid state to gaseous state, these kind of things,
you can. So there are a few, especially in the quantum realm, there might be some, and I'm not saying they never happen, but what you can do with all of these things is you can zoom in. Okay, so you have some parameter that causes these phase transitions, and you say, okay, I'm now going to zoom in and I'm going to turn this parameter really, really slowly. What do you see? You can take anything that looks like a sigmoid, that looks like a sharp transition. If you just do a little higher resolution on the parameter, everything flattens out. And you see that it's actually a smooth and gradual process. Maybe not in some quantum mechanical processes, I don't know. But the kinds of things that I think are relevant to biology, there's almost never a sharp. I've never happened. I've had this debate with many people, and I've yet to hear anybody that has an actual sharp transition.
Yes. This is our serving director. He is the chair of this conference. He started the conference series back in 2013. Dr. Madhava Puri.
Thank you very much for participating in this discussion, giving your ideas. we're trying to introduce actually a way of thinking that will solve the problems that have arisen because of the way that scientific reductionism thinks about reality. I've written this book, The Idols of the Mind versus True Reality. And this idea of idols of the mind is something that Roger Bacon, first talked about when at the very beginning of the whole introduction of science to the modern world. And it's a very important idea. We find this one idea in the Vedas, especially, let's say, the Bhagavad Gita, which is a summary of much of the Vedic teaching. Vedas are the knowledge. Veda means to know, and Veda are the books of knowledge given to us through the centuries in the Eastern tradition of India. And there, this idea of Maya means illusion. And what is an idol? An idol is actually an imaginary conception or an imaginary form or shape of supposedly in the ancient tradition God. To create an idol was to worship a false God, something that was assumed to be God or the truth, but wasn't. So this is what science has at its root, which Bacon himself was able to perceive, is that we perceive something to be true and we honor that, we worship that, we study that, we give so much attention to that, but it has nothing to do with the real God, with the reality that we're facing. Now, if it requires a great deal of thought and careful consideration, discrimination, I would say, to understand what it is that we have created for ourselves as reality, and to look at that reality itself without interposing that constructed idol upon it. So, for instance, Dr. Levin, you were talking when Krishna Keshava was talking about intelligence, the I, as being an individual self, and you mentioned the kidney, the liver, that's the other things as contributing to the I, and saying that there was no reason to accept some hierarchy over that total, contribution from various parts. But that's a false conception of what is ontologically the case, because we know that ontologically, for instance, a tree is coming from a unitary thing that's called a seed. In the Vedic conception, there's a philosophy called bija, the bija conception. Bija, B with a long I, J, or B-E-E-J if you want to call it, a bij. Everything starts from a bij. Now the bij is the seed. So when you have the seed of a tree, an acorn, for instance, how is it that a whole oak tree develops out of that seed? You look at an acorn, there's no obvious connection between that and an oak tree. Yet, every part of that oak tree, the branches, the root, the trunk, the leaves, whatever it may be, has come from that same thing. We may call it totipotent or pluripotent. I don't know what the right term is now in geology, but there is something within the original bees, the seed, the ovum or the egg, or whatever you want to say, that is beginning the life, that is capable of producing everything else from it. Now, just this fact in itself tells us that there is a hierarchy, there is a unity before the diversity appears. And that diversity is under or subservient to that unity. It's not that the unity is something we imply later on after the diversity appears. No, that's the way the diversity did appear. It appeared already from a unity, or what we may call a unity. It's actually a unity in diversity, but we don't know the diversity as we talk about it as a seed or an ovum or whatever. So it is not correct to say that the individual organs of an organism, for instance, are having some equal non-hierarchical relationship to the organism as a whole, because that organism developed from something that was not diversified to begin with. So there is a unity that already pre-existing, and we're just ignoring that. And what happens is that we forget, we don't realize what we're doing. When we analyze things, we see them as just a diverse unit, a diverse thing, but we forget the genealogical, and in that sense, I mean origination principle, that where they came from. Those things did not come, are not just there existing and then somehow got together and a bunch of existing entities, we may call them, or atoms or whatever, molecules, whatever unit you want to start with. Those units are not just existing there. Why do we think like that? Where they came from something that unitary in itself. According to Veda, they are the universe itself came from a seed, and it developed from a seed, just like the body develops. This conception, seed. Now, our professor Haukedal is wanting to show how Hegel has already solved these problems, has already thought through these things, how a systems approach to science can be formulated. He's already given the philosophical principles. And I think that one of the main philosophical principles he has given, and you should know this also, is that Hegel says the truth is the whole. The truth is the whole. You can't look at a piece and say that is a true. This is what science, this is reductionism in its actual form. The reductionists say these parts are truth. This is the truth, these parts. But it's not, it's a part. A part can't be the truth. It's a part of the truth, no doubt, but it is not the truth in the sense of the whole story. So the truth is the whole. You can only understand the truth in its wholeness, but you won't be able to capture it by a part. Just like the story is given in the ancient Vedic tradition about the elephant and the blind man. Blind men, set of blind men are in the dark and they're trying to determine what the object before them is. And one holds the side of the elephant and says it's a brick wall. Another one holds the leg of the elephant and says it's a tree trunk. Another one holds their tail and says it's a rope. Another one holds their tusk and says it's a spear. The other one holds the tusk and it says the trunk rather, and says it's a snake. Because they have no idea of the whole. They're all thinking that what they're experiencing is the truth. And then when they get together and say, well, no, it's a combination of this. It's a wall and a trunk and a rope and a snake and this and that and the other. And that's the whole. No, it's the wrong idea. Without understanding the whole, you can't understand in truth what is the part. If I give you a piece and I say, what is it? You have to know what is a piece of. A piece of pizza or a piece of apple pie is a piece of what is it? You have to know the whole before you can understand the piece. The piece is not independent of the whole. It is determined by the whole, and this is the problem. The problem is that we have ignored the whole. We think we don't know the whole, or that it can't be known, and that we have to know the pieces. Then we put them all together, and then we get the whole. What is backwards? You can't go like that. Vedas tell us that is not the way that things should be approached. First, you have to know the whole. Then you can understand what the pieces are. Now, that's the opposite of reductionism. Reductionism doesn't work because you assume you know the truth at the partial level. And from those truths, you try to build up something greater than that. That's the whole truth. That's not the way things are developing in this world. It's not ontologically correct. Just from our own observations of nature, we can see that nature develops from a whole, from something that is a whole, but in an essential form, as a seed form. And then it develops itself into its expression. So how to see, actually, I think Leibniz gave a better idea than what we have today as what we call atoms. He called them monads. You may know about monadic theories of Leibniz. That, in other words, the piece, or the thing that we want to start with, that can't be understood independently of what it is in its entirety. A monad has the total reality within itself. It's already, the total reality is there. But it's only a part that is manifested before us. Now, in quantum mechanics, we have a similar situation. In quantum mechanics, the totality of reality is represented by the square of the wave function. The square of the wave function, a wave function multiplied by itself, or its adjoint, that is necessary in order to get any observation. We start with that totality of the square of the wave function, and then an operator operates on it. And from that totality means the total possibility of all realities is given in the square of the wave function. We can say the potential, to make it more clear. The potential for all reality is already given in the wave function. And an operator or an observation is applying an operator to the totality, and from that totality is coming an instantiation, which we call an observable. That instant that we observe is related to the totality, to the whole. It's not that it's just there, and then somehow that builds a totality. The totality always has to be there. And quantum mechanics tells us we are operating on that totality and producing the manifested particularity of that totality. So the whole and the part are related inextricably, ontologically, however you want to say it. There's no separation of these two things. It's just the way we are seeing it. We see it as isolated because that is the process of observation, what that observation does. Observation reduces the totality into an instantaneous thing. So when we talk about molecules or this or that, the other thing, these are reductions of the totality of the whole as pieces, and we're not connecting them with the whole again. And this is the problem. What we think the soul is an ancient idea. Oh, nobody thinks about these things anymore because they have nothing to do with molecules. But a soul, what does a soul mean? In Aristotelian philosophy or other philosophy, in Vedic philosophy especially, the soul was the whole in its immediate existence. Immediate existence means what we call nature. Nature is the immediate existence of the whole. It's how the whole appears in its immediacy. The whole is not only an immediacy, but it's a mediated truth, a process. It's not something that depends upon itself in order to be what it is. Just like Dr. Shapiro, he was saying life changes itself. It's a very good idea. Life doesn't arise from a set of accidents. It's not the accidents that a bunch of disconnected particles doesn't produce life. Life is changing or producing itself. Now, what does that mean when you say that life is changing itself? You've divided life into two parts. To say that life changes itself, there's the life and there's that which is changing. So you have a division occurring. And all of life is coming from that kind of divisional process. Life doesn't arise from an accumulation of things. Life arises from a division of itself. Huh? In the embryogenesis, life doesn't come from some accumulation of different molecules from here and there. It produces its own molecules. It produces its own self from that original beach. So when we look at things and we forget about where they're coming from, what their origination is, what their original source is, that unitary source from which they are all coming, especially when we're looking at living things, then we're not looking at it properly. We're looking at it with some kind of like blindfolders or blinders, that prevent us from seeing the where it's coming from, where the whole thing is, how the whole thing is connected. And we're thinking that later on, okay, we'll figure out the connection as we go from piece to piece and put them all together. No, it started all together at the beginning. Okay? And then only later it has become something that we see as differentiated parts. So this reductionism is a problem in science. And I can understand it. The scientists are now beginning to understand, especially when you look at life, that reductionism doesn't explain what we are seeing, what we are observing, how things behave. But still we are forgetting that the origin of these things is involved in what we're seeing. It's not that simply we see things and they are there and that's all we have to consider. No, we also have to consider where they came from. Now, Aristotle, he gave these four atitis, these four, what he calls principles of causality. That causality is not we cannot see things as merely existing. To see things as merely existing is to not understand, not explain things in their truth, because things don't merely exist. He told there's also a final cause and an original cause, a formal cause and a final cause, and the efficient cause, huh? Not only the material cause, but four aspects of cause. The final cause, what is that? It means things don't merely exist on their own. They exist for the sake of something other than themselves. If we see existence as merely atomic existences in and for themselves, we're not seeing it properly. That's not what existence is. Existence has another dimension to it. Existence, what it exists for. We can call this functional existence if you want. The things should not be seen as isolated entities, but they should be seen as functions of something other than themselves. Now here we get into a real system. Here we get to understand what a system is. If a system is just a bunch of unrelated, isolated entities, then what is the question of system? That's only a conglomeration you can get out of that, an aggregate. But if things have an intrinsic relationship to other things, being for something else, for the sake of something else, then they become not isolated entities, but functions. And these functions are activities, actually, because a function is a role that it plays. Everything plays a role in something else. There you have your liver and kidneys are not isolated competing entities with the total self, but they are derivatives from something other than themselves, and they're all derivatives from that same thing that is other than themselves, that is unifying them. It's already unified. We don't have to apply a unity to them from somewhere else. They are unified by their own ontological being, but we're seeing it wrong. We see these as isolated entities that have to be unified by something external to themselves. No, that is not reality. That is our conception of it, and that is a wrong conception. It doesn't conform with what reality that we observe, with that reality itself, the reality. So the problem is we have to change our thinking not not as an isolated, thinking is not something isolated from what is real. Thinking is intrinsic to what is real. And if our thinking does not conform to the reality, then we do create false false idols, false impressions, and assume that to be the reality. And here's the problem. This is the problem. This is in the Vedas are called Maya, illusion. To take a rope to be a snake. You step on a rope and you think it's a snake. The mistake is not that the rope is not there, the snake is not there. The mistake is to confuse these two things. So this is the problem. There's a confusion in science, and that has to be clarified. And we have to study carefully the great philosophers who have discussed these things for generations, thousands of years, not only in the West, but also in the East, everywhere. The same philosophies are there, but in different language, in different ideas, and different levels. Then we can clarify what is system science and how that is the real application. That is the real application to the nature, to understand it in a systematic way and not in this piecemeal, fabricated way. What else do they want to say? Oh, the other thing.
I think Michael Levin has to go. I think he has to go.
Huh?
He has to leave, I think.
Oh, Michael, you have to leave?
Yeah, I apologize. I've only got a couple of minutes. Yeah, but I'm going to need to go. Yeah, I just wanted to kind of say that in no way am I arguing for reductionism, right? The main thing that I said in my talk is that what we actually need to understand is how the wholes and the parts come together. And we are showing ways in which that happens, so that when you look at an embryo, whether it be an acorn or a human embryo, the number of actual individuals there is not one. It's anywhere from 0 to half a dozen. There isn't a necessary unity anywhere, and you need to be able to explain, which now we can do, under what circumstances do you get 1 human or 6 humans, or how many, or I think the record is like 64, if I remember correctly. So the thing is, I don't disagree with most of what you said, but when you say this or that is wrong, or it's it needs to be changed or whatever, I think we need to keep in mind that the ultimate judge of all of this is going to be discovery. And so I can point to specific things that people have discovered by being very focused on the scaling, how you get from a diversity of molecules or cells or whatever to either a single human or multiple humans or whatever. It leads to advances in cancer biology. It leads to advances in regenerative medicine. It leads to the repair of birth defects. It has measurable outcomes on discovery. So if there's an alternative view of all this, as you've pointed out, there are different ways of thinking about this. That's great. Let's see what that leads to, right? I think it's really important not to just lean on the philosophy and then say that this or that is wrong, but to actually say, if we take this view, this is what's doable. This is what we can do. We can address this, and this. We can create new things. We can repair, whatever. That's we need some criterion for knowing which of these things is correct or not, and being fruitful in terms of discovery is the one that I like. So I actually don't disagree with most of what you said. I think reductionism is a fundamental problem, but the solution for that is not to.
That's also my point. I also agree with that. But the point is that I'm making is that what our philosophy, or let us say what we think and what we're observing, are not in coordination with each other. They're not in agreement with one another. For instance, you're saying you're thinking, or you have an idea that a living entity arises from a combination of molecules. That it started off with molecules, diverse entities, real entities that somehow got together and formed a unitary structure called living organism, or let's say a unity and diversity, which we call a living organism. But we say there's the problem, because we don't observe that. There's nowhere, anywhere in the scientific world, any scientific lab, that scientists have put together some molecules and created life.
But you know that had to have happened once, right? At least once on Earth that had to have
You are
happened.
saying that. You are saying
where did life come from?
That's the point. See, you're saying that, but
what is your hypothesis?
The
Where
whole
did it come from?
proposition of reductionism, that it had to start somewhere, but it started with molecules.
What is your hypothesis? Where did it come from?
I'm saying our presumption, or the Vedic presumption, is that it started with the bija. The bija is already life. It's already the whole and its parts combined. It's like a monad.
And that's fine, no problem. So my suggestion, and I apologize, I really do have to go. My point is, start with that model and make discoveries, right? Let's see what does that lead to. I don't know what that leads to. I know what origin of life research leads to, and I know what synthetic biology research leads to. I don't know what your model leads to, but let's
not saying
find out.
It's not just a theory. I'm saying, practically speaking, from what we know, what we can know, what we know is that molecules don't form life. We have no experience of that. There is no experience of that. That is just a thought, a misconception that we're bringing to nature and saying this is what happened. But who are we to say that? When we don't
propose a different theory and use it to discover something new, and I will be there with you. That's the name of this game, is to propose a theory and see what discoveries it leads you to.
We have to form our thought on what we observe. Our thoughts must be based on our experiences. We can't just come up and say, well, the moon is made of green cheese.
No, but if a specific model is giving rise to research in cancer and regenerative medicine and birth defects and engineering, there's something going on, right? And so if you want to replace that, you need to produce a different model that is at least as fruitful. You need to take the things that you're suggesting and you need to use it to derive something that's useful. And I don't know what that would be, but thank you. I appreciate it, everybody. I gotta go.
Thank you, Dr.
Bye,
Levin.
everyone. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye, Michael.
May I jump in just a little bit on the Hegel part?
Yes, that is the central part.
I think maybe we have a small disagreement, because you say the thing about the truth is the whole, and obviously this is a very important part of Hegel's thinking. But Hegel simultaneously, he doesn't necessarily say that the whole determines the parts, because if he said that, he would ascribe to a completely top-down model. What Hegel says it would be more similar to Leibniz.
Well, wait a minute.
And I think Hegel is actually, as you know, he doesn't agree with Leibniz on this.
Well, hold on a second. Hegel is a dialectical thinker. Therefore, to say that the whole determines the parts is only half a dialectic.
Yeah.
Other part is that the parts determine the whole as well. And this is what Kant himself described as an organism. If we look at Kant's description of organism, he is saying this: the parts are determining the whole as much as the whole is determining the parts. That is the dialectical understanding of things. And so Hegel certainly does not agree with that. That is what he's formulating.
Yeah, no. So then we don't disagree upon this. I wasn't quite sure. But I mean, a person that's been mentioned a few times, Dennis Noble, has this view where he says, instead of the top down or the bottom up, you should have the middle out approach. So you begin in the middle and you work both ways, So maybe this is something more similar to what you are proposing. And I don't know. Maybe someone else wants to comment on that.
Another thing that I would like to say, how this applies to what Dr. Rosslenbroich was talking about, is that Hegel's dialectical theory says that reality is a circle. Now, this was one point you were making, that there's circular causality in living organisms. That it's hard to point out, just like the chicken egg problem, you can say. which came first, the chicken or the egg? Well, of course, you can't have an egg without a chicken, and you can't have a chicken without an egg. So you have a circular problem here. And this is the other point that Kant makes about organisms. Organisms are circularly causal. That means the cause and effect are what is a cause for one effect is also the effect of a previous cause. And like that, the causes are to be understood not only as causes in one way, as a cause effect, and that's it. The cause may also be seen as an effect, on the effect of a previous cause, and so forth and so on. But if you look at it linearly, then you say, well, where was that original cause? Then you run into a problem. There's where the problem is. But the idea of circular causality, that is not a problem, because on a circle, you can start anywhere in the circle, from this point, that point, or some middle point between them, and the whole thing will hold together no matter what. Because each is connected like a circle, like the points in a circle. So this was Kant's idea of the whole. And it's also Hegel's idea of the whole. He said the whole was his circles within circles, if you study his philosophy carefully. And he understood it that way, that the whole is a self-subsistent entity. And so you can't start with a point, with a molecule, with an atom, because there you're establishing a foundation that is outside of the reality, by which the reality is not formed. The reality is not just start with a part of itself. The reality is the whole of itself. And the parts are just parts of that reality. And until you include that reality in the part, you can't properly conceive the part. Yes.
I absolutely agree with you. And that's about what I tried to say in my contribution. But there's some sense for science to make a cut into these relations and to study a certain point within it. And I think this is really what science has done, just from the methodological point of view, to figure out one part and to really concentrate on it and to study it really in detail, and to get a good view on what, for example, an organelle is doing, protein is doing, gene is doing, and to study this in really detail. So there is a methodological sense in this reductionism, if you want. In my book, I made a difference between reduction and reductionism. Reduction is to focus on one aspect within an organism or within an ecosystem and to study it, while reductionism is the thinking that everything is determined by this part. But from a methodological point of view, it is really valuable for science to do a reduction and to focus on things and to isolate things and to study these things in detail. So it has a sense that science is doing these studies of parts. That's very important, I think. It's very hard to think always from the level of the whole. I absolutely agree that in the end, we have to integrate these things into wholes of different levels, like Dennis Noble is describing them and things like this. But the method to look at single points, single aspects of nature is really important. And that's what science is doing, isn't it?
Yes, there's no problem in that. However, it is a one-sided approach. It is a one-sided approach.
Yeah.
You're failing to recognize what role the whole plays in the part. And that can't be done. If we want to have a science of what is, the whole has to be there to play a role. in whatever we're talking about when we speak of parts. And then how do we include that? Now, the ancients had the idea of soul as how to include that when they're talking about the parts.
I agree, but I agree. It has to be regarded, and often it is not regarded. But that doesn't make all these details we know about nature and cells and everything less valuable.
I'm sorry?
It's important to study all these details. That's what I want to say.
We won't be able to understand the thing from the details.
No, I agree, but
It'll be never ending.
yeah. But on the other hand, we won't understand the whole if we don't know anything about the details.
I agreed.
It's interdependent. The point, and that's what you said. It's interdependent,
This
and
agreeable.
this is the exciting thing.
But I don't see science addressing the role of the whole in science. This is the problem that I see. And this is what I call reductionism. It tries to analyze the whole from the sum of the parts. No, you can't do that. The parts and the whole can't be separated into different categories, just like Descartes. He said there's res cogitans and res extensus. His idea was to divide the cognitive and the material, the being, into two separate things. That's not how reality works. Reality is not a separation of thought and being. It's the identity and difference, both the identity and difference of thought and being, that is at work in reality. And we have to realize that. We have to understand that. If we are
in the end, I agree, absolutely, yeah. But I, on the other side, see the value of reduction, not reductionism, but reduction. That's the point. There is a value in it to have all these details, but we have to make the step, and that's what you are asking for, the next step, to integrate this and to see things from the viewpoint of the whole. And then we have an overview to see the details and the whole together.
Well, but what I'm saying is that reduction is not the proper way of understanding reality. I'm not saying that doesn't mean that there are not parts and that we can study the parts. Of course, it means there are parts. If we speak of wholes, we can speak of parts. But the point is that we cannot understand the whole in terms of the parts. That's reductionism.
Yeah, okay.
We cannot.
That's my difference. That's my difference between reduction and reductionism.
I see.
Yeah.
I'm not quite clear on what that means, but anyhow.
So I think reduction is to acknowledge that the part is a part of a whole. And now let's just look at the part, fully cognizant that it's a part of a whole.
Okay.
Learn about it. And then when we learn about that part, automatically it's time to reintegrate it into the whole. Something like that. Where reductionism is, forget about the whole, there is no whole, it's just parts, and then we can play Legos and build the whole afterwards. But he's rejecting that as reductionism. Reduction is to say, it's a part of a whole, let's understand the part, and then understand its function in the whole.
But I say we can't understand the part without understanding its relationship with the whole. That has to be intrinsic to our understanding of the part. We cannot falsely imagine that the part can be understood as a part without understanding what it's a part of.
So you're suggesting that
I don't think these two options are mutually exclusive. I think they can coexist. I think that's the point.
You're making some emphasis that, though, the process of reduction should start not just an ambiguous acknowledgement that a part is a part of a whole, but what is the detail of that relation first? You have to start with the relation of part to whole. And then once you have that relation established, then from there only you can have a real idea of what the part is. But you have to start with the relation, and then you can reduce.
Dialect, that's the dialectic. Dialectic means don't just try to understand things from their half-sidedly, one-sidedly. This is the problem. We have to understand the whole. We have to understand from both sides. Just like a thing is not merely a thing. A thing is also a thought. Electron. What is an electron? How do you think electrons started? Did electron produce a thought of electron? Or did the thought produce the idea? Did it produce the observation of electron? Einstein once said, he said, it's not the experiment that determines the theory. It's the theory that determines the experiment. Unless you know what you're looking for, you won't find it. So the electron is starting off as a thought. And then we observe. So everything, this was Hegel's central point. He said everything must be understood as both a subject and a substance. Both. It's as much substance as subject. It's as much a concept as it is a reality. Reality and its concept are not diverse. They're different, but they're not unrelated. They're intimately related. And that identity of the concept or the thought and the thing is essential to when we're speaking about reality. And if that we don't make that connection, if we ignore that connection, then that is ignorance. We're just not understanding what's going on when we're talking about things and forgetting that it's also connected with the thought of the thing.
But if I may use Hegel here again, like, I agree with what you say, but from a purely methodological view, I think Hegel would also say that you can't simply assume the whole to begin with. That is why he starts his logic and he starts the phenomenology with what appears the most simple. He wants to do it without presuppositions.
Yes.
Then he moves on to see where he can go with each category until it dissolves itself. And then finally he gets to the final stage and he realizes that absolute knowing is only this method of getting knowledge. It's not actual like knowledge of everything. It's knowledge of the process of how you get knowledge in a way. So therefore, he also has he starts with the simple, and then when he arrives at the method, he goes back to what's simple, and then it's just, he starts at that point, and the whole process is basically just, how do you say, like, to make the first point more, to open up the first point and see all the implications of it, So you could say that through looking at parts, you could try to do something similar. You can see how far you can go with looking at the part in isolation, not thinking that it is isolated, but see how far you can go with it. And then you can see, okay, probably it is impossible to understand this part. But I guess the problem for modern science is that they thought that they could understand the part in this way. And then when they ended up like having some impasse, they would simply ignore it and just like, yeah, but this is nonetheless like they would focus on what they already knew instead of pushing it further,
Yes. Anyhow, but Hegel, when he wrote his phenomenology, was aware of the importance of the whole. If you read that statement that the truth is the whole, he states this in the preface to his phenomenology. So he already went through that process, and what he was describing is how that process occurs from a systematic, like you're saying, from a part to the whole. But he already understood the whole. Right?
But you can imagine scientists doing something similar and saying like, I try to operate without too many presuppositions, and then you see how far you can go. But the problem is that I guess that they haven't been pushing it necessarily. They haven't been willing to go further in many cases. goes back to what we were discussing earlier with like Richard Dawkins, you know, like that he didn't want to expand kind of his perspective, you know, because it worked within the limited confines that he had defined in advance, you know. So
might we just we've had this very interesting, very widespread discussion. I just want to make sure Dr. Shapiro, if he has anything to say, please feel free to interject or even change topic if you like. Please, anything you have to say.
mm.
You know, I think that this kind of discussion is very rich and makes us appreciate what we're trying to do as thinkers and scientists, and how we put the parts in the whole back together again. And that is the secret of how we understand what's going on.
Okay. Then
Maybe I can ask Professor Shapiro a quick question.
please.
It was just so I know that you are familiar with because I know that you edited a volume about what's called tissue organizational field theory. You know,
No.
that's been proposed by. Am I mistaken, or?
No, that's not me.
I think it was James Shapiro. You were at least it's something by Anna Soto and Carl Sonnenschein. If you're familiar with them.
I know who they are, and I've commented on their work. But
Okay.
I didn't.
Okay, maybe I'm mistaken. I just wanted to ask you, because I'm quite interested in their theory and how you think it might relate to what you're saying about transposons and stuff like that. So I guess it's a little bit on different levels of research, but yeah.
Yeah, it's rather different, and I think they're talking more about development and organization, the multicellular organization. I'm just focusing on what we know about the DNA and how it changes.
Okay.
You should have asked Michael Levin. He has a nice paper on the field theory, and he compares this to his considerations about bioelectricity. So he proposes that a physical framework for understanding the field theory might be the his bioelectrical field. That's an interesting paper. You should look at papers from Michael Levin.
Yeah, I know that he is in the same university as them. I wanted to ask, but then he left too soon. So, what's the name of this article? You remember?
Yeah, I don't know by
I can try
heart.
to.
I have to look at this. I can
Yeah.
send it but if you look at the papers of Michael Levin, of course they are numerous, but you will find it. There's,
Okay.
I think it is. You can see it in the title. It's about field theory.
Okay, thank you.
I have to leave now.
Okay.
So thank you for a stimulating discussion.
Thank you. Thank you for coming, Dr. Shapiro.
Thank you, Dr. Shapiro.
Thanks a lot.
You have been a very important pioneer in this non-reductionistic thinking. I appreciate it.
Yes.
Yeah, it's 4:00 in the night in China, so I think I should
Yes.
retire. Yeah.
Thank you for sticking it out. We were so happy to have your contribution.
Yeah, no, I was very happy to be able to participate and discuss with all of you.
And if you're interested, we can still make a full recording of your presentation if you'd like.
Yeah, it's absolutely something I can consider. Just let's just stay in touch and we'll figure it out.
Sounds good. And do you have any
Okay.
concluding words for the conference, Maharaj?
No, I would just like to say that I think both of you, Dr. Rosslenbroich and Dr. How do you pronounce his name?
Haukedal.
Haukedal. I think both of you have presented very comprehensive conceptions, very comprehensive explanations of what the situation is in science, and trying to bring that all together into cohesive philosophy or conception. That will be that's the next stage of science, and to be able to accept the contribution of that, the conception, that whole, what we would call consciousness, is actually the whole conception of things. What is our conception of things? We call it consciousness. So life will not be satisfied until that conception and what we're conceiving, the object of that conception, are in agreement with each other. We won't stop studying, we won't stop investigating until that occurs, when our conception of the whole and the whole are in agreement with one another. And that is the what you call the self-fulfillment or self-determination that everyone is seeking. Anyhow, it's a big topic, but maybe you know, or maybe you don't know. Hegel talked about the cunning of reason. Sometimes things are going on, we don't even realize what they're doing. But it's happening, and it's coming to its own conclusion, even despite our being unconscious of what that is. Anyhow, I appreciate what you're doing, and I see the great contribution that you are making to that whole development of spirit, even though we may not recognize what it is that we're doing. Anyhow, thank you very much.
I'd also just
Thank you.
like to just take one moment to just thank Dr. Puri. He has been doing this work since 1974, and he has seen lots of transformations of science and philosophy, and he has seen lots of transformations of the people around him who get lost in the tidal waves of social dominant perspectives, and he's stayed very true to what he understands to be the main point. And I just want to thank him for inspiring this conference series, inspiring this topic for this year, and we hope to humbly contribute to whatever progress is to come. Thank you very much.
Thanks
Yeah,
a lot.
thank you for the conference. Thank you.
Jai.
So
Okay.
goodbye. Yeah.
Take care.
Take care.
Take care, everyone. Please stay safe.
Bye.